Well, we are here this morning joined with the Wichita County District Attorney John Gillespie, who served as the prosecutor in the capital murder trial of James Irvin Staley III. And John, thank you so much for coming and talking with us.
It's good to be here, Josh.
It is, we're now a couple of days removed from the verdict. We've had time to process a little bit, sleep in our own beds, get a little bit of rest. Now that you're on this side of the verdict, how are you feeling now that he's been found guilty, he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison?
I woke up Tuesday morning, the day after, and with a lightness that I haven't had in the entire 4 years plus that this has been pending. The weight of being a voice for Wilder, the weight of speaking for him has been very heavy. I've cried a lot. Personally, I'm a very private person, but just the weight, like, am I going to say the right words for Wilder? Am I going to be the voice for that precious little boy? And waking up Tuesday morning, I felt like, it was a long time in coming, and it was a lot of teamwork, but we are finally there. The world knows what he did, the jury knew what he did, and he was convicted, and convicted relatively quickly of that. And so it won't bring Wilder back, but I feel like we honored Wilder with the prosecution that we did in this case.
So one of the things that you mentioned is how long this has gone on. When you took office as district attorney in Wichita County in January of 2019, that was only 2.5 months after Wilder died. And so this has been something that has been hanging the entire time you've been in office so far. And so personally, what did that mean for you? Obviously, it meant a lot to Wilder's family, it meant a lot to the community. For you, what did it mean to hear the judge read the jury's verdict of guilty? What did it mean to you?
I was pretty confident by the time we got to the verdict. We had an amazing jury through jury selection. I watched them. I watched their reactions to the GoPro video, and I felt like they were right there with us when doing closing arguments. But you still have that anxiety. I leaned over to Lisa Tanner that was helping me try the case, and I said, you have that, the thrill of getting to do closing on a case like that. If you're a trial attorney, that's what I think God put me on the earth to do, and getting ready for that is that. Then you have the agony of you got to sit there and you think, I know the jury's with us, but to hear those words just meant everything to me. So I was so relieved, and I couldn't help it, but I wanted to watch and look at what the psychopath's reaction was. So it was kind of fun to watch the reality hit him, because he had been so overconfident this whole time.
So one of the people that you mentioned was Lisa Tanner, who was prosecuting alongside you. And there were a lot of people who made this case happen. There was a lot of very convincing evidence. There was a lot of really powerful testimony. From my perspective, one of the strongest things that you guys had was Lisa there prosecuting with you. Tell me a little bit about what an asset she was and how she kind of changed the game for you guys.
Sure. First off, a little background on Lisa. She's a career prosecutor, and she was in charge of the felony division for the Attorney General's office. So she would go in and help district attorneys try capital murder cases. She's probably tried more capital murder cases than anybody in the state. She's also known, and I think you saw this in court, for being an expert with forensics evidence, DNA, that type of evidence. And so I was looking at this, and I knew that Staley had hired Mark Daniel, who's on the Texas Forensic Science Commission. We had a lot of DNA evidence that was very critical, and other forensics. And so I reached out to Lisa. She's retired from the Attorney General's office, but you can still bring her in and help on cases. And so she agreed to come on board. But it was two things that she brought. First, just her vast experience in murder trials was just invaluable. It was so great. and then to be able to give the forensics piece of it to her. Now, I know the forensics evidence, I put on forensics, but knowing that she was in those hands so we could match, fight fire with fire. He's on the Forensic Science Commission. He's supposed to be an expert with forensic science, and so having somebody that knows that was just so key to this case. And I'll give you one example. Detective Nelson requested amylase testing, which is saliva testing. Now, to me, if you have a toddler who's sleeping in a pillow, toddler slobber, so I'm not sure how much that would have shown, but that was requested. And I did not know this, but Lisa immediately did when the defense attorney was questioning Detective Nelson about it and just excoriating him on the stand. If you didn't follow up, you didn't get amylase testing. They don't do amylase testing anymore. When that was something that really fell aside when the lab started doing their DNA testing. They don't test for that. SWIFT's, the Southwest Institute for Forensic Science, doesn't, and Lisa immediately knew it. And so she couldn't wait to bring that up with her DNA expert, and really just exposed. This was just, the defense attorney knew that. He's doing what defense attorneys do, but it made Detective Nelson look bad in the moment. But then Lisa turned it right back around on him. So having somebody with that type of vast experience on forensics was just key to this prosecution.
So you mentioned Chad Nelson. I think one of the moments that stuck out in my mind was, number one, just how long he was on the stand, but how Mark Daniel was just firing at him, and how he stayed so composed that whole time. There were a lot of testimonies that stood out. That one stuck out to me. Was there anything about the way he handled himself on the stand that stood out to you?
Absolutely. He was unflappable on the stand. Detective Nelson is just a very kind and calm person. He's a good person, and I think that came out to the jury. It was his first murder case, and he was. We all learned. My first murder prosecution was a lot different than this murder prosecution. I've tried a lot of cases. You learn and you grow. And Detective Nelson would tell you that he was very diligent. Very prepared, and I think that came across on the stand. And he was taking, just constant incoming fire, rapid fire from the defense attorney, and I thought he handled himself very well. But I'm proud of him. I'm proud of the investigation that he did, and I thought he acquitted himself well on the stand.
Yeah, I can't argue that at all. Something about this case that kind of made it maybe a little bit different than other murder trials that people have seen was just the fact that the hard concrete evidence was as far as like a definite like smoking gun wasn't there, but circumstantial evidence was there in abundance. I think there is an idea that circumstantial evidence can't prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. I'm wondering, from your perspective, is that just a misconception altogether?
It really is. So first off, Texas law doesn't give any weight to direct or circumstance. It doesn't say which is more powerful. Secondly, a lot of the false convictions that people have heard about come from eyewitness testimony, which is direct. Let me define for the viewers. Direct evidence would be eyewitness testimony or a confession. Everything else is circumstantial. So DNA is circumstantial evidence. Fingerprints is circumstantial evidence. What happens before, what happens after is circumstantial evidence. So everything else is circumstantial evidence. And circumstantial means the circumstances of the crime. So you look at this case and you have a man who hates a toddler, who has expressed I thought it was pretty clear in his text messages that he wants to do away with him. And then you have his behavior after the crime, and with the crime you've got his DNA and his only on the murder weapon, the pillow. That's all circumstantial evidence. And so it's the circumstances that are there because of the crime. So a lot of the false convictions that the public has heard about, nationwide are from bad eyewitness testimony. We're not very good. All the studies show that doing cross-racial identification, for example. So if you have a rape victim who's raped by somebody of a different race and they pick the person out of a lineup, that's direct testimony, but a lot of false convictions are based on that. Circumstantial can be very strong and very powerful, and I think it was in this case. To develop the circumstantial evidence, though, is what we were all doing, when the public, I come into office January 1st and there's all this clamor that he hasn't been arrested and nobody's doing anything. We were working to build that circumstantial evidence that when you see the total weight of it is very powerful, but it takes piece after piece. The analogy I used in jury selection and we carried through the entire trial into closing was circumstantial evidence is like putting a puzzle together. And so you have a puzzle piece here and a puzzle piece there. If you look at one puzzle piece alone, you probably don't have enough for a conviction. For example, the DNA on the pillow. It's the defendant's DNA, but it's a pillow from his house. And so if you sleep on a pillow, your DNA may be there. Nobody else's DNA is on that pillow. So that's a pretty important little puzzle piece, but by itself, it's not enough for a conviction. And so what we were doing in this case was putting the puzzle pieces together. And you start with the relationship of the parties. What was the defendant's relationship with the little boy? Did he love the little boy, or was there something else going on? Which, your viewers know there was something else going on. He hated that child and called him the worst things possible. And so it's like starting with the corners and the borders. So you start going the relationship of the parties. Then, you add in the forensics evidence, and it's puzzle piece after puzzle piece. And in closing argument, I actually went back to that. I was talking to him about circumstantial evidence, and I had a photo of Staley that a graphics friend of mine had turned into a puzzle, and we had the puzzle pieces with a couple of pieces missing, but the picture was clear to the jury. And so that's what you do with a circumstantial evidence case. One other thing I want to say about circumstantial evidence is it is very powerful, but I get a lot of, I've heard a lot of questions about, why didn't you seek the death penalty on this case? We had powerful circumstantial evidence, but it was circumstantial. And everything that I've heard, it's my decision to make, and I made that decision consulting with the family. But it also, in this day and age, you do not want to seek death unless you have what they call a lay down at guilt innocence. And while we had a very powerful circumstantial evidence case, it was circumstantial evidence. We did not have a confession. We did not have an eyewitness. And the last thing I wanted to do would be to turn that psychopath into a martyr and have all the people, the Kardashians and everybody else lined up saying he's falsely accused. There were 2 people in this house and all. And that's what they do on death penalty cases. And I actually think, frankly, that with a guy that has been in charge of everything, that's called the shots, he said in one of the text messages that I used in closing argument that he makes his own rules and no one can tell him what to do. Living in a cell like the animal that he is for the rest of his life, being told by other people what to do and not having any celebrity support or any of that, I think that's probably the worst thing that could happen to him. But the fact that it was a circumstantial evidence case went into my thinking on whether or not to seek death, because I do believe in the death penalty, but I also wanted to be very smart about how we went about this prosecution.
Sure. One of the pieces of evidence that no doubt was the most shocking, the most intense, the most emotional, we've referenced it already, it's the video of James Staley slapping Wilder in the face. There's obviously the emotion and the anger that's going to draw from people when they see it. What else did that piece of evidence do for your case other than what we all knew it was going to do?
The main thing, and this is where having Lisa Tanner was so incredible, we divided the case. She was taking the mother and the forensics evidence. I was doing the Wichita Falls witnesses and the digital evidence. That freed me up. We had a realization in late January that GoPro, that the metadata showed September 18th on it. But in talking to Detective Fowler with Wichita Falls PD, who's an expert, and he's the witness that sponsored it, and my chief investigator, Ty Davis, we put our heads together, and it was like, that's the upload date. That doesn't mean the date that it was made. So we were looking at these text messages that we had. Well, Staley demanded, there was the September 1st incident, which is called the falling off the bed incident, where Wilder fell off the bed, allegedly. Staley pushed him off the bed. His daughter told the forensic interviewer, she was there, that Daddy pushed him off the bed and laughed about it. Well, he demanded that the mother quit work at the bar as a result of that. He said, you failed at momming, you weren't here when your child needed you. We started looking at it, and after she quit the bar, there was never any point in time where we could find in the text messages around September 18th when he was alone with the child. And then the realization hit us, because I don't think like a psychopath. You know, I've dealt with them before, but it's not something that's just very natural to me or to anybody else. But we started to realize, and we all had kind of the realization in the room together, is he did the GoPro slap so that Wilder would have facial bruising. I'm sure, you know, when I was a kid, we would wrestle around on the bed, that kind of stuff. People would fly off the bed. You don't get massive head injuries when you go off a bed. But he needed him to have a head injury so that when he fell off the bed, he could blame that. And I think what he was doing, that's September the 1st, murder is October the 11th. He was creating a history of shortfalls that were damaging to Wilder, and that's why you have the assault before the bed. Now wrap your brain around this, and this was what was so just hard even for me as a career prosecutor. Walter's asleep, he sets up the GoPro, comes behind him and hits him as hard as he can on his head and face. Then, after all of that, he maneuvers Wilder and his daughter into bed and then pushes Wilder off the bed. So he premeditates two assaults on Wilder the same night. That creates this history of falls with Wilder having a serious, bruise from that. So when we were focused on the digital part of the case, one of the questions I asked, and that Detective Fowler and my chief investigator, Ty Davis, answered, I said, what did he do with this video? Because he makes this video, I called it the hostage video, but he's holding Wilder. Wilder looks terrified. He's got a big bruise on him. And Staley looks at him and says, did you fall off the bed? And Wilder says, yeah. And he says, do you think I pushed you off the bed? And Wilder says, yeah. He says, I didn't push you off the bed. You fell off the bed. Then he turns and says, hey, you need to come home. He fell off the bed. He needs you. He has quite the shiner. Well, what we noticed in looking at his phone, he had about a 48-second, the full video, and then you had about a 24-second where he edited out the part where Wilder said that he pushed him off the bed. And I said, who did he send that to? We need to know that. So we went into the program and we traced it, and he sent it to his mother and the mother of his, to Staley's mother and the mother of Staley's child 11 days after the murder. And he said, see, Wilder had a history of falls. This is all the proof I need. Now, he edited out the part where he says, do you think I pushed you off the bed? And Wilder says, yeah. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to prove premeditation on this case, but I believe in my core, and I think the jury believed it. He created a history of shortfalls with the bruising so that he could say, he could murder Wilder in the crib and then stage his body on the floor and say this kid fell out of the crib and it was one of a pattern of shortfalls. That's the psychopathy. That's what we unraveled. And it was late January, early February when we put all of those pieces together. Because most of my child abuse homicides are somebody who's not equipped to handle the needs of a child. they get upset with the child, they lose their temper, and they do something dumb in a moment like shaking and slamming the child down. This isn't that. This was something far more evil and far more premeditated, I believe.
Wow, that is. I was in the courtroom and I didn't pick up on all that. That's the fact that you guys put that together is amazing.
Oh, one last point.
Yeah.
So Detective Fowler, we put our heads together and we took the GoPro of the assault and we took the hostage video where he's holding Wilder, and they had the same clothes on. Staley did, Wilder did, and then Brooklyn the daughter was there in both, and the items on the sofa were in exactly the same order. So that's why we believe that they were actually made the same night.
I could probably rack your brain about this case for a while.
Sure.
Because it was a lot to be there, and it's obviously been something that the entire community's been invested in. But I think we'll wrap up with just a couple of things. I don't know. I'm not sure with everything that was going on. Did you happen to catch what Staley said when he was being taken into custody?
Sure.
When he turned, looked at the gallery, and he said he didn't do it. I think that was the only time the entire trial that the Judge Young had to call it back to order. I'm wondering, and feel free to not answer this. Was there any response that you thought of and didn't say in that moment? I'm curious.
I will tell you, yes, but it's not appropriate for the error.
Fair enough. So I think the something that is that we saw. I think it ended up being filed a minute before business closed. The day of the verdict was the appeal. I don't think it was very shocking, and I'm not going to ask you to speculate grounds, anything like that. What I am wondering is how confident are you with the work that went into this? You talked about the preparation that went into it, the building of the case, and putting the puzzle together. How confident do you feel that verdict is going to hold up?
I feel very confident about it. We will certainly be as diligent on appeal as we were in the trial, but that's one of the things of doing the case the right way and building a case like this. It took us a long time to do it because of the forensic testing and putting all the pieces together, but we have a very solid case, and I'm very confident it will stand up on appeal.
And so there's been a lot of people that we've mentioned, a lot of people that we've talked about. But there were a lot of people who played a role and maybe have since are going on doing other things. The person that comes to mind right away is thinking about when we had that press conference right after Staley was arrested and the charges were filed. One of those people who I know is working in the 97th now, Judy Price, who used to prosecute in the DA's office, had a big role. There were a lot of people who played a role. Is there anyone specifically, or groups of people that you want to thank?
There's too many to list. We had an amazing trial team. I always start with my chief investigator, Todd Davis. He came into office, or came to work for me in January of 2020. And was there from then until we were able to put the case together, and just did so much behind the scenes. Sergeant Sheehan with the Wichita Falls Police Department was instrumental behind the scenes. Detective Fowler, Detective Nelson, and so many other officers at the Wichita Falls Police Department. The chief worked with us in letting, we worked so closely together despite a lot of public pressure that, the public, because of, the Justice for Wilder campaign, they didn't know what we were doing behind the scenes, and we worked together and did it the right way, which gets us here. I'd rather do it right and win than be quick and lose. And that's what we did. Then Lisa Tanner was just phenomenal. You saw her in action, and the fact that she was willing to come in and pour her life into this, it was just such a key piece. But there are so many people to thank, and just so those are some I'm leaving out many people. But.
Sure. Yeah. And kind of as the final, to wrap it all up, looking back on this, the road that it took to get to that guilty verdict, the time that it took, you mentioned the public pressure, I can imagine that was taxing, but we ended up where we believed it should have been, with the guilty conviction, with a life sentence, justice for Wilder being served. We've heard it said it's not going to bring him back, but he can't hurt anybody else. Staley can't hurt anybody else. Is there anything to our community, to Wilder's family, anything that you would like to say, to verbalize in conclusion, as all of this kind of wraps up, comes together?
The thing that stood out to me, and I said it in closing argument, the jury heard Wilder was trying to tell anyone who would listen, and his family didn't know. There wasn't any way for his grandparents or his aunt to know when he said no James what he was trying to communicate. I can't imagine how heartbreaking that is. But he said no James. I said in closing argument, there was one text message where the defendant sent where he had heard the no James, and he said he was going to stick him in the garbage can, put the lid on it, and say no Wilder, no Wilder. Now there is no Wilder, and I told the jury, I said, you've heard the evidence, we've proven it beyond a reasonable doubt. You need to say by your verdict guilty, and when you say guilty, what you will be telling him is no James, no James, no James. And so I think the family, the community, and especially that precious little boy got the no James from the jury. They said, no James, you don't make your own rules. No James, you don't get to buy your way out of this because you're a rich psychopath. I think he's a poor psychopath now as a result of it, but you don't get to buy your way out of this. No James. And no James, you don't get to harm anybody else. And I think he enjoyed this, and I think he would have done it again. So I'm very, very thankful for all that. It doesn't bring Wilder back, but I am very thankful that there was a measure of justice at the end of this case.
Well, you actually reminded me of one thing I was going to ask you about. There have been some things that have been filed in the past couple of days, or I guess yesterday, since he's been in custody, about claiming something about his mental health, and all of a sudden he's got a public defender. Do you have any insight into what all is happening with that?
Sure. We spent a lot on the case. I don't have a final figure, but whatever we spent, he probably spent 2 to 3 times as much. And I think that plus the implosion of his oil business, nobody wants to do business with somebody that's under indictment for capital murder. I think that all fell apart with him coming up with the money for the trial. My understanding, in hearing what happened yesterday, I told the judge we didn't need to be there at the indigency thing because that's a decision that the court makes, but I got a briefing as to what had happened. All he has to his name now is a pickup truck. He had to give a relative a deed of trust on his house for them to advance some of the money for the defense, and he signed a power of attorney for a relative to sell the pickup truck. The proceeds of that will go to the court reporter, and then he is officially indigent. They brought him down yesterday in a paper gown because he's suicidal, so he can't have normal clothing on. And apparently he wept through the entire proceedings. He grabbed his lawyers and cried into them and wouldn't let them go, crying, I guess, for himself and all of that. I guarantee you there was no tears shed for the little boy that he murdered. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for him. I don't have any sympathy for him. But that's where he is. He started out a rich psychopath, and he ends this case a poor psychopath who will be told what to do for the rest of his life.
That's strong. All right. Thank you so much for taking the time, talking, reliving some of the past couple of years, especially the past couple of weeks. Thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate your time, and I thought your blog and all that was just terrific during the trial, Josh.
I appreciate that very much.